The Executive Committee of the Missouri Basin States Association met yesterday in Omaha, and one of the meeting's major concerns was the possibility of creating an interstate compact which would spell out policies on the use of Missouri River water. In today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile, we highlight yesterday's meeting and give a preview of some special reports which are upcoming next week on KLYF. The Missouri River Basin States Association, the MBSA for short, is an association of interested states, 10 of them in all, which have a stake in how Missouri River water is used. Iowa and Missouri, for example, have a stake in the river for transportation and water supply purposes. But other states, such as South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana, have a stake in the river for irrigation purposes and for the recovery of oil shale deep underground. And at least one state, Nebraska, has a stake in the Missouri River for both transportation and irrigation purposes. The uses to which the Missouri River is put are at cross purposes among the states, and the MBSA is trying to mediate potential conflicts which could come up. William Cruz, the Missouri River Coordinator for Iowa Governor Robert Ray, attended yesterday's Executive Council meeting of the MBSA in Omaha and says that the existence of the MBSA is a good sign for all states which have an interest in using Missouri River water.
At this point, we're really making progress. I think that everybody agrees that the demands for water are greatly increasing on the Missouri River to the point where they could become over-allocated. I don't think that they've felt that this has been the situation in the past.
But Cruz also pointed out that some states, especially those in the Missouri River Basin's western region, were clear to point out what the MBSA should not attempt to do.
Individual states should not give up any of their rights to individual determination, nor should they be legally bound by the association. I think at this point that is obviously correct. This is a forum to bring together the 10 states and discuss where we go from here. If we'd ever end up in some type of compact, this would be the body to bring that about, but not necessarily the body to have that right away. Also, they were pretty clear that the association should not engage in any comprehensive regional planning.
You'll hear the words of Bill Cruz and others as KLYF starts a special series of reports on the appropriation of the Missouri River and what it means to Iowa, as well as the Missouri River Basin area. That's next week on KLYF. And that's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile. I'm Mike Lee. Today, KLYF begins a special 5-part series on the Missouri River and the competing interests which want its water. In part 1 of this series, we set the scene through the eyes of a South Dakota spokesman and a Sioux City spokesman. The Missouri River has been twisted and reshaped before by the Army Corps of Engineers to suit human desires, and now there's a very good chance that some of the Missouri River's water could be diverted through western South Dakota to Gillette, Wyoming for a coal slurry pipeline owned by Energy Transportation Systems Incorporated, which is a Western United States energy consortium. We'll just call it ETSI for short. The economy of Sioux City, Iowa benefits greatly by being able to use the Missouri River for barge traffic, something which Mayor William Skinner appreciates. And he realizes the amount of water talked about for the ETSI pipeline diversion doesn't seriously affect downstream states. But Skinner does worry about the pipeline setting a precedent for the building of bigger water trenches off the Missouri River.
This is not in itself is not a major loss of water. It's a precedent pointing, if it continues on in this direction, then we can be in trouble. Not only Sioux City for its transportation, but other needs up and down the river.
Those needs include water supplies for downstream cities in Iowa and other states, as well as transportation needs for Iowa and Nebraska. But South Dakota Attorney General Mark Meyer-Henry says he's not very sympathetic to the economic problems of Sioux City because Sioux City is supposedly not very sympathetic to the economic problems of South Dakota.
We have transportation problems in South Dakota as well. The mayor of Sioux City, or Sioux City, Iowa, has not been involved in assisting us in our railroad transportation problems, our airplane transportation problems, or any of our problems. On the other hand, we want to be good neighbors. We understand their problems, but we're kind of in an economic guerrilla warfare in the upper Midwest, and we just all have to fend for ourselves.
Meyer Henry also looks unfavorably upon the Missouri Basin States Association. That's a confederation of representatives from the 10 states in the Missouri River region, and it's attempting to lay the groundwork for a compact among the states regarding Missouri River water usage. But Meyer Henry says the MBSA isn't worth messing with because it has no power.
I think it's an absolute waste of the taxpayers' money from South Dakota, Iowa, and every other state. If you're going to sit around, pay a lot of people a lot of travel money and salaries to go negotiate something they aren't bound by, it doesn't take a very smart person to figure out that's a waste of time. We either have to be bound by it, or I don't see that you'd gain anything. Now, our governor may take a different view, but I haven't ever been big on spending the public's money just to gossip, because that's basically what you're doing if you're not bound by it.
And Sioux City Mayor William Skinner agrees the MBSA has no binding power upon the states participating in it. But unlike Meyer Henry, Skinner says the MBSA is very helpful.
I have an immediate reaction to Mr. Meyer Henry's statement. It seems to me that if someone wants to do something unilaterally, then you try to ignore any confederation trying to come to some mutual understanding. If you want to come to a mutual understanding, then you join a confederation. Sure, he's absolutely right that there isn't that federal. By federal, I mean imposed restrictions that can come from that group. But if indeed there's a regional concept for the well-being of the entire region and its water needs and resources, then you do dovetail your concerns with those of others in the region.
Tomorrow we'll look at the proposed water trenches, which would divert much greater amounts of water from the Missouri River than the Etsy coal slurry pipeline would. That's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile. I'm Mike Lee. In the second part of KLYF's special series on Missouri River water usage, we focus on a proposed water diversion of the Missouri River, which would use much greater amounts of water than the coal slurry pipeline that's being proposed through South Dakota, and is therefore much more worrisome to downstream states such as Iowa. It's unlikely that both of the proposed northern routes actually would be built. One would start at Fort Randall, South Dakota, near the South Dakota-Nebraska border, and extend southwest through Nebraska to Colorado. The second route would start at St. Joseph, Missouri, and extend west through Kansas. The reason for thinking about the trenches is that the Ogallala Aquifer, which is an underground reservoir of water which allows Nebraska to grow the huge corn crops it does, will eventually be depleted. Just when the depletion will occur is uncertain, but it is certain that the High Plains Study Council, of which Nebraska and Kansas are a part, is starting to hedge its bets before it's too late. Getting one of the routes in place by the year 2000 would be a safety valve against depletion of the Ogallala. The Army Corps of Engineers has been commissioned by Congress to study the feasibility, costs, and environmental impact of building the water trenches. A contractor in Texas is studying the economic impact the trenches would have on the plains and near west should the trenches be built. We'll have more on the economic impact later in the series. But it's the environmental and economic impact of a water trench that worries downstream Missouri River states such as Iowa. However, Thomas Kinchlow, a Corps planning manager for the water trench project, says the diversion wouldn't be constant.
When the flow in the river drops below some target amount, there would be no withdrawals for diversion to the high plains or anywhere else or wherever. So whatever the target flow might be in the Missouri, say, I think it's something on the order of 35 or 40,000 cubic feet a second in the navigation season. If that was the target flow that was selected, any flows below 35 or 40,000, there would be no extraction. But when there were high flows, when there are flood flows, and that's the basis on which this has been analyzed, when there are high flows or flows in excess of this target, if you will, then waters would be sucked off at a substantial rate in order to capture those for transfer.
And Kinchlow says downstream cities such as Omaha, Sioux City, Kansas City, and St. Louis would benefit from the diversion in times of extra heavy precipitation.
When there were low flows, why they wouldn't be drawn down even lower. The idea is to pick off those high damaging flows. So conceivably there could be some flood prevention aspects of this thing.
But downstream states such as Iowa are still dubious, and Kinchlow acknowledges the estimated completion date of 2000 for one of the trenches assumes little or no litigation on the part of Iowa or other downstream Missouri River states.
Of course, the Corps battles that on projects all the time, and as you probably know, it takes a number of years even just to get a moderate-sized flood control or similar project completed. So you can't ever tell about that. That would be assuming a pretty amicable settlement of the water question to be able to do it in that by year 2000.
Kinchlow estimates the cost of the trench starting at Fort Randall, South Dakota would be about $10.5 million, and the one starting at St. Joseph, Missouri would be about $7.5 million. That's in 1977 terms, however. It's uncertain who would pay for it if either trench was to be constructed, but if Congress gives its blessing to the project, it's likely Iowans might have to pay some of the bill through federal taxes taken out of their paychecks. And as we will find out tomorrow, some Iowa leaders don't like that prospect. That's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile. I'm Mike Lee. In Part 3 of KLYF's series of reports on Missouri River water usage, we examine some of the reasons Iowa's leaders oppose large-scale transfers of the river. If the proposed water trenches to divert Missouri River water to the plains in near west states were ever built, the federal government would pick up a large part of the bill, which means that Iowans would have to pay their share through federal taxes taken out of their paychecks. Meanwhile, cities such as Sioux City, which rely on the Missouri River transportation as a partial check against price fixing among air and land transportation modes, fear they might lose that check if the water trenches go through. Skip Meisner, director of the three-state Siouxland Interstate Metropolitan Planning Council, says that Sioux City needs the Missouri River at adequate levels for both the city's economic and recreational livelihood.
The provision of cheap transportation is a savings of expenditure to the producer. And any additional cost of transportation, like a water user tax or any other type of additional transportation charge on a commodity that's price is set at the world market, is paid by the producer and not the consumer. It is also has a good impact on keeping rail rates down, and as well it is the reason in Sioux City area that we have a stable flow of the river 8 months of the year, and thereby we can use that river for recreation and a lot of allied uses.
Meisner says current federal laws probably give the Dakotas preference in using Missouri River water for irrigation and water supplies, so downstream states such as Iowa might be out of luck in challenging that preference in the courts. But Meisner says current laws are hazy on whether the near west states can use Missouri River water for a potentially bigger project to cool down oil shale extracted from beneath the ground.
The beneficial consumptive uses are there, and the amount of water available for those types of uses has already been set out by the Bureau of Reclamation. That's very well known. I don't think there's much of an argument to that at all. It is those kind of uses that were not contemplated by the Pick-Sloan plan that you have more of a problem. And those may or may not be the things like coal slurry or coal gasification or water for those kinds of uses.
If the courts decide in favor of the near west states' oil shale excavations, then energy-poor states such as Iowa could pay in two ways. First, through excise taxes which some energy-rich states impose on energy products shipped to energy-poor states. Second, through federal taxes to build the water trenches. Tomorrow, a look at the economic advantages for states which want to divert the Missouri River, and a look at an effort toward compromise in the river's basin region. That's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile. I'm Mike Lee. In Part 4 of KLYF's series of special reports on Missouri River water usage, we examine some potentially divisive issues among the states in the region who want the water and the hope for a compromise among those states. Diverting the Missouri River. Some states might come out economic winners, others might come out economic losers. On the one hand, near West and Plains states want the water for oil shale excavation and irrigation. On the other hand, states such as Iowa want the water for transportation. The key state at this point is South Dakota because its leaders are in favor of a water trench diversion for a coal slurry pipeline in Wyoming. South Dakota Attorney General Mark Meyer-Henry sees that water trench as a tremendous economic opportunity for the state of South Dakota.
South Dakota gets some revenue to start development in our state is basically the gain we get, plus the fact that we start to use the Missouri River more productively for all the citizens of the United States, and I think that's something that's overlooked. We read the comments from politicians in Nebraska and Iowa and Missouri, but what they forget is that they've had large benefits. There's no longer floods in Sioux City, there's no longer floods in St. Louis, and all of this is within the United States, and we're all citizens here.
Downstream states such as Iowa worry that the creation of that trench would be the start of bigger diversions. But this is where Meyer-Henry becomes a friend to Iowa. He says states such as Kansas and Nebraska, which would look forward to getting Missouri River water if the Ogallala Aquifer ever goes dry, don't deserve a diversion.
Farmers and other people in those states right now are using an inordinate amount, an amount that is not proper for nature to replace. Then I don't think we have to bail them out. That's their own problem. Maybe they've squandered their resource. And we all have known of nations and states who squander their resources, and they have to pay the price.
The Missouri Basin States Association is trying to create a forum of discussion for Missouri River water usage among the river's 10 basin states. The Missouri River coordinator for Iowa, William Cruz, says this is an issue the states should not let the courts decide.
We feel that the states should be able to get together and decide among ourselves what's best for all of us, rather than having these projects go on until we have to take drastic action and let the courts decide it. We feel that the states are very equipped and should fulfill the responsibility of doing this.
Meyer-Henry of South Dakota doesn't agree with Cruz on the need for an MBSA, but Meyer-Henry does agree with Cruz that the issue of Missouri River water usage is important and will become increasingly so for the rest of this century.
Water is becoming scarce and more valuable, probably more valuable than oil.
Tomorrow, we'll find out if weather modification holds any hope of providing enough water for the dry plains and near west states. That's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile. I'm Mike Lee. In the final part of our series on Missouri River water usage, we take a look at the alternative of cloud seeding and its prospects for providing the necessary precipitation for drier states in the plains and near west. The most traditional way of inducing precipitation through weather modification remains cloud seeding, either with silver iodide or dry ice. But you can't deposit those materials in a clear sky and expect them to work. As Stanley Chagnon, a prominent name in the weather modification field, points out, the presence of clouds is absolutely essential to inducing any precipitation.
But the dictates of how much you get will be determined by the natural weather. If you don't have clouds, you're not going to get anything.
However, Chagnon points out that weather modification is still a developing science, and as such it probably doesn't hold any immediate or even near-term hope as the answer to the upper Midwest's increasing thirst for water.
It's still very developmental. It does not fairly be compared, I think, Mike, with the fact that you could build a canal from point A to point B and water would flow through it, or that you can irrigate crops if you've got enough water. It is a developing technology. It's being used, yes. Many people believe, people in North Dakota for several years have been spending their good money to have summer clouds seeded for rain and to decrease hail. And those activities have covered, half the state. The same type of activities have gone on in South Dakota for many years. So there are many believers. The scientists are still aptly, I think, described as saying it's not well defined yet, and that more research is needed to develop a very predictable technology.
But the experiments with weather modification continue, and until some sort of breakthrough is achieved, the fight for water in the plains and near west will be restricted to ground sources, either above-ground rivers or underground aquifers. And that means we cannot look to the sky and hope for help from above, at least not as far as getting adequate precipitation for those areas, at least right now. We point this out in the hopes that you, the listener, will realize that the fight for water in this country, and not just Missouri River water, is bound to become an increasingly important issue in the 1980s. And what decisions about water usage are made in this decade will most likely affect us and those who come after us for many years beyond. That concludes our series of special reports on Missouri River water usage. I'm Mike Lee, and that's today's KLYF Public Affairs Profile.